Well, with more on the numbers, let's bring in Eric Grenier now, the man behind the Writ. Eric, hello to you.
Hello.
So, we've been talking about this sizable lead Conservatives have over Liberals for quite some time now, but here you are, you're breaking down the numbers, translating them at the riding level, and you're essentially revealing not only where Conservatives would form their government, but where they would form their majority as well. So let's break it down, beginning with the Greater Toronto-Hamilton area. What are you seeing there?
Well, we're seeing that the Conservatives are really well placed to put an end to the Liberals' dominance in the area. In the last few elections, the Liberals have swept Toronto. They've won every seat more or less between Hamilton and all the way out to Whitby. But you can see that right now what is projected is that the Conservatives are going to do quite well in a lot of the GTA, particularly in the western parts of it, places like Mississauga and Brampton. Again, two cities that the Liberals swept in the last few elections. Lots of seats that could swing over to the Conservatives. All of the Oakville area, Burlington, north of Toronto and York region, just a lot of the GTA that really cemented Justin Trudeau's government over the last few elections, in this case would cement Pierre Poilievre's majority government. And I think that's the biggest difference there, is that the Liberals need those seats to just finish ahead, win a minority government. For the Conservatives, it pads them well above the 172 seats they'll need in the next election.
Yeah, well, certainly there's no denying the amount of blue when you look at that GTHA map. But, let's talk about Toronto, though, because, the 905 surrounds Toronto. But what about the city itself, as it has been Fortress Liberal for quite some time?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's really going to be interesting in the next election is that it isn't just going to be Liberal and Conservative fights. There are going to be some with the NDP. The Democrats haven't won a seat in Toronto over the last three elections. So while the Liberals are going to be trying to fight off the Conservatives in North York, in Etobicoke, in other parts of Toronto, they also have to be fighting off the NDP in the downtown core of the city. And that is, I think, if you're a New Democrat, you would look at some of the numbers that we've seen, just a few polls in the last few days that have put the NDP and the Liberals within 1 or 2 points of each other nationally, is that while the Liberals are poised to lose a lot of those seats in the inner suburbs, in Toronto, in the GTA to the Conservatives, in the city centre, a lot of seats could go to the NDP, which could make up for Jagmeet Singh and the New Democrats for some of the losses they're likely to have in places like British Columbia and Northern Ontario.
Okay, you say British Columbia. Let's now go to BC and talk about the Lower Mainland, because we just saw a resurgence of the provincial Conservative Party, and that's thanks to the gains being made by the federal wing. How do you see Conservative numbers breaking down in the Lower Mainland?
I think if they were looking at the map that the BC Conservatives had in the election in October, I think the federal Conservatives could think that they could do quite a bit better. One of the problems that John Rustad's Conservatives had was breaking into Vancouver itself, the city. But I don't think that the Conservatives, at least based on the numbers we're seeing now, would have that problem in Vancouver itself. So not only winning seats in the Lower Mainland, south of the Fraser River, like Surrey, Richmond, Delta, places like that, but also in Vancouver itself. There's a few ridings in the city that could go over to the Conservatives. And again, this is just what we're seeing reflected in Toronto, in other big cities as well, that the Conservatives are not only well positioned based on the numbers we've seen to win the suburbs, but also start to get a little bit closer to some of the downtown cores.
Okay, closer. But, as we talk about the GVRD in particular, the Greater Vancouver Regional District, let's talk about the NDP here. Strong at the provincial level. Why are we not seeing more orange on that map when it comes to Vancouver?
Yeah, I think for the New Democrats, one of the issues for them going into the next election is that they have a lot of their MPs in British Columbia. And we've seen that the Conservatives have sometimes been upwards of 45, 50% in BC. So the NDP is going to be under pressure. Some of the seats they will be able to hold will be in the Vancouver area. But what we saw with David Eby and the BC New Democrats in the last election is that they get some of the Liberal vote and they get the NDP vote. Jagmeet Singh hasn't done the job to get that Liberal vote. So some of the seats that the Liberals were able to win in, for example, Surrey, parts of Vancouver, the NDP is not going to be able to take those. For the NDP, it's really just about holding what they can in Vancouver, in Burnaby, where Jagmeet Singh has his seat. For the New Democrats, they are under a lot of pressure. And if they do lose seats in the Vancouver area and don't make up for it in Toronto and other places, then the 24 seats that the NDP won in the last election might look like a very good number.
Okay, listen, quickly running out of time. We should talk about Montreal, though, because we know Pierre Poilievre has been trying to make big efforts in hopes of getting big gains in Quebec. But when it comes to Montreal, at least, what you're seeing seems to be a number of Liberal holds.
Yeah, that's the one place where the Liberals still can count on, a dozen seats, maybe more than that. We do see that the Bloc could pick up a couple seats in the east end of the island where they used to have representation. The NDP could also make some gains, not because the NDP is doing better in Quebec, but just because the Liberals have dropped so far down. So there could be actually some movement on the island, which we haven't seen in the last few elections. For Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, winning in Montreal seems like a hard proposition. But, a seat like Mount Royal, maybe Pierrefonds-Dollard, those seats where there's lots of Anglophone voters, that's where the Conservatives could make inroads. But for the Liberals, we're just seeing that they are being pushed out of all of the areas that have delivered their governments over the last few elections. And instead, for Pierre Poilievre, at least outside of Montreal, those seats would put him in the Prime Minister's office.
Okay, well, an early snapshot as we still wait to see when the next election will actually take place. Eric Grenier, thank you for this. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.